college football nerds here to talk Michigan and Notre Dame. It's a primetime huge game last year, and a little bit of the shine's come off of this one, given Michigan's stubbed their toe a couple times this year. But I think there's still a lot of interesting discussion here, and it's still a big game in the college football landscape. So we're going to talk about it. Got Josh with me. We're going to do a little computer model action. Going to get nerdy with y'all, but also going to talk about some other parts of the game because we do more than just look at box scores. I know y'all love accusing us of that, but we actually do watch the games. Watched a lot of Notre Dame, a lot of Michigan this year. So, Josh, let's talk about this. So, right now, to me, it seems like Michigan a little bit. I don't want to say the wheels are coming off because I really don't think they are. I liked what I saw against Penn State last week. I felt like they had a lot of fight in them, really, especially coming back in that game. I think that the perception of this game is, especially based on rankings, is that Notre Dame's a whole lot better team than Michigan and that Notre Dame's going to absolutely kill Michigan. But I wonder is if you flip these team schedules, would the perception be different in that not just that this will be a blowout, but would the perception, even maybe the ranking, be different in that Michigan will be the higher ranked team and Michigan will be assumed the team that's going to win this game, when in reality, Notre Dame could still be the better team, but because the schedules are different, the perception's different.
I think that's an interesting point and probably one that has some merit to it. I mean, when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, Louisville has been a much better team this year, but I wouldn't necessarily call them a good one. They won a close game against USC, 30-27. USC is not a particularly good team, though they're solid. And then, they actually do lose to Georgia. Could Michigan have gone 5-1 against that schedule? I mean, I think they probably could have. I don't know. Those teams are all very different from Iowa, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily better than like an Iowa class team. I think Michigan probably could go 5-1 against that. The flip side is maybe more difficult if Notre Dame could have beaten one of Wisconsin or Penn State at this point. I'm not going to put myself on the spot to try to answer that question, even though I just tried to. But I do think, maybe there is something to the perception that's based off the fact that really right now Michigan's schedule is just a lot harder. And I think a lot of it is the fact that Wisconsin is a lot better than people expected. Iowa's good. Penn State is really good. We're on the other side with Notre Dame. And we flagged this. We did a preview, right? And we talked about how the schedule was kind of setting Notre Dame up for, win or lose Georgia and then, maybe Michigan, and that's about it. The schedule's just not very hard. And some of those teams like Virginia or Louisville or USC might have been better than expected. I don't know maybe everybody had USC preseason, but they're not better enough than expected to really consistently challenge, a highly ranked team with any, any consistent forethought. So when you look at it that way, Michigan's still number 19, but would they be higher? I think maybe. I mean, I think they might be a top 15 team at this point if they'd had that schedule.
I want to, and some of this is going to sound either negative to Notre Dame or overly positive to Michigan, but part of it is because the easy discussion in this game is Notre Dame's going to kill them. Notre Dame's way better team. Michigan's, Michigan sucks. But for me, I wonder how similar this Michigan team is actually to the Georgia team that beat Notre Dame and is going to be maybe a little bit deflated crowd, but it is going to be at home. In terms of makeup, are these two teams kind of similar? I know Georgia has a better stable of running backs, but in terms of like kind of pedestrian offense, sneaky good, really good defense, and that seems to be on the defensive side of the ball what gives Notre Dame struggle. Is that another place where we can maybe flag this game as being closer than either the point spread or what the model says because of the makeup, not necessarily in aggregate that Michigan's a great team, but specifically the matchups in terms of strengths versus weaknesses that Michigan could potentially have in their advantage?
Am I allowed to say no?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. I actually think Michigan and Georgia are very different. And I think the temptation is to say they may be similar because the production has been similarly inconsistent on the offensive side of the ball in particular. But the way that they operate defensively and offensively is very different. Michigan is a solidly built defense with good players all around. I'm a big fan of Glasgow. I think Metellus is good, but I think sometimes they've been a little limited defensively in the back end. They've brought in guys like Dax Hill. They're trying to clean that up, but I think they're still there. But I think they're mainly dominated by the fact that they have a very physical front seven. They've got sound players in the back end. They don't make a ton of mistakes, and they kind of make you earn it. Georgia, on the other hand, I think defensively they can mess things up a little more. You can run the ball more in Georgia. I think Georgia is a lot more aggressive defensively and probably a good touch faster. They're more talented than Michigan, and that's not a slight to Michigan. It's just that Georgia's more talented than all but maybe one or two teams in the country, actually, which is kind of why it's so shocking that they've struggled the way they have. On the offensive side of the ball, though, I think is where most people would try to draw similarities, and I want to point out how different they are in their struggles. So Georgia has an elite offensive line. They have a great game manager at quarterback, and I say that not to say he is a game manager, but he's great at managing the game. And they have a phenomenal stable of proven running backs. The problem with Georgia is a lack of explosiveness at receiver, a lack of any separation by the receivers in the past few games, to the extent that they almost can't throw the football. A very sort of throwback offensive play style. Now that they replaced Chanley, and then the new guys just not really trying to push the ball down the field. And there have been signs that they could succeed if they would, but they're not trying to. So they don't put enough in the quarterback's hands to let him manage the game. They try to lean too much on the running backs, the offensive line. Teams stymie them. And then their receivers can't really get open with the time the routes are doing, and they don't give them easy plays to let the talent take over. Michigan's very much the opposite. But the offensive line is not great. They're probably a little better than they get credit for, but they're not great. The backs, they've got Charbonnet and a lot of really unproven options. Patterson is a terrible game manager, but a very dynamic thrower and a phenomenal athlete. And he can make some great plays. And, the big shame in the Penn State game is he made a phenomenal play at the end of that game, and it gets dropped, and really hate it from Ronnie Bell. But I especially hate it because the receiving core at Michigan, is actually a lot better than Georgia's. I'm just going to say that straight up. Collins, Bell, Peoples-Jones, Black is kind of maybe theory a good player, but we haven't quite seen it yet. All those guys are really effective receivers, and I think they probably don't get enough attention, especially with Ronnie Bell's been able to bring to the offense, so what they've kind of turned into. They're really high talent, highly recruited, good receivers, and they can't get the ball because they do all this kind of cute stuff, and they don't really run a true offense, or that Patterson's not comfortable with it, and they make poor reads. And it's like the exact opposite of Georgia. It's a team that can't run the ball enough to keep the other team offense honest. They try to be really aggressive, and then they're really inconsistent with it, and they can't move the ball. And that's kind of where you end up with Michigan, where, and I'll kind of throw this back to you, but my curiosity is if Michigan ran the offense that Georgia runs, which was kind of like the offense it used to run, I almost wonder if they'd be better, if they'd be a better team, if they didn't ask Patterson to be so explosive, if they let him, run a more simple, less aggressive offense, and, kind of just let their receivers and their separation take over.
Yeah, I think they might be, and Michigan fans probably don't want to hear that, but they also need to know that they made a switch offensively because they were just good enough to beat the 10th, 15th best teams. So if 10-2 in a decent bowl game is what you're looking for, then you could have stuck with what you had. And you probably would be in a lot better position to win this game than you are right now, given that Gaddis is shaking everything up. And I'll say it again, I say it every Michigan video, that was a bad hire. But the problem is that doesn't scale up to actually winning you a championship. You're not beating Ohio State. We saw it last year with that offense. So to get to the next level, you do have to shake things up enough where you maybe take a step back before you can take two steps forward. But what you're talking about is potential. And on this roster, and we said it last week, Michigan fans or Penn State fans killed us. They absolutely killed us because we said we both picked Penn State to win by about 10-ish points. I had 10, you had 11. We were all over that game. Penn State fans killed us because we didn't pick a blowout for Penn State. And one of the things you said was, especially wide receiver, we love KJ Hamler, but wide receiver unit, quarterback, in terms of potential, not past production, in terms of potential, they have a lot higher ceiling than Penn State. And I would say the same for Notre Dame. Michigan has a higher ceiling than Notre Dame offensively. Ian Book has struggled, especially in this last game against USC. We know who he is. We know what you're going to get. We both like their wide receivers, don't love their wide receivers. There's really not a KJ Hamler on that team, which leads me to a question for you, and then maybe we can get into the data after. In terms of looking at Notre Dame's production this year and what they've done, true or false? 35-20 over Virginia is a very much underrated win. And 30-27 versus USC, even though it's a rivalry game, isn't getting enough negative heat towards Notre Dame in terms of perception.
Both interesting questions here. And so you hear me furiously clicking. We try to follow things, but we don't have a ton of time, so we do a lot of this stuff on the fly. I think I'd agree with you on both counts. So first off, Virginia, they rolled out a clunker against Miami a couple weeks ago following that Notre Dame game. But other than that, they beat FSU in a closest game, but pretty well. They just stomped Duke, which we felt like...
It's not bad.
Yeah, and going into that, we were really beginning to be curious if Duke might be the second best team in the ACC. They soundly beat Pitt in the opener, which lots of people keep trying to make excuses for why Pitt is a good team, and I don't really think they are. I think they're just okay. But I didn't say that because the ACC fans are all going to get mad now. That they're already mad. It doesn't matter. I think Virginia is a good team, and they've had a very good defense, and they've played good ball. They've got a good quarterback. With what Mendenhall has been able to build there and what he's got in Perkins, that's a much better team probably than gets given credit for. And for Notre Dame to win that game by 15 points was good. Now the flip side. I don't think USC's that good. I don't think that win was very good. USC is, obviously 3-3, and yeah, I know the losses include Washington and Notre Dame, and they beat Utah. They haven't really looked good in many of those. They lose close to BYU. I get that. The big win over Stanford does not look special at this point. Close 8-point win over Fresno. Arizona they do Arizona things and decide when they're going to show up in a given week. I don't think USC is a great team, and they've had issues at quarterback off and on, and you can sort of get into whether they played good USC or bad USC. I'm less concerned with the fact that Slovis might actually be a good passer, and more concerned with the fact that Notre Dame threw the ball for 5.2 yards per attempt in that game, 165 yards with 32 attempts. Now, it's a little crazy because Tony Jones was averaging 107 yards per carry and 176 yards, and they probably should have run the ball more in that game than they actually did, even though that number is, it's inflated, and we talk about this a lot. If you can take out 1 or 2 carries, like in this case, and it drops to 3 or 4 yards per carry, you're not really running it that well. But it's still, I think they probably threw the ball a little too much, especially given you're only at 5 yards per attempt. But it's scary. USC's defense has not been great. They have not done a great job of shutting down passing attacks, and yet you can throw it. And I think one of the biggest things for Notre Dame, and this is, I think, why they struggled in the USC game, it really does come down to the fact that the passing attack doesn't really have the weapons on the outside that they need to be overly successful. And I think there's a lot of blame going around, potentially with Ian Book, and I don't know where everybody's at with it, but, I like Chase Claypool. I'm not in total love with Chase Claypool. And I don't want people to be offended by it. You've had phenomenal receivers over the years at Notre Dame. And last year, Miles Boykin was the guy. And he was a really good guy. And before that, you had Equanimous St. Brown. I'm never going to say that name right. Just all the way through the years, really good receivers. Will Fuller before that. They don't have that guy. And what we saw with USC is they're relying on Cole Kmet as basically the primary receiver. And Cole Kmet is a great tight end, a really good tight end. He's not a wide receiver. And they weren't able to exploit a USC secondary that can be exploited. And that's, I think, where my concern comes from, because you can beat a Virginia that can be shut down a little bit, I think, offensively. But you can't really exploit a team that maybe has weaknesses in the secondary. You don't have explosiveness in offense, which means a lot of Notre Dame's games have been close because they're not explosive enough to pull away from the teams they're playing. That's, I think, why Notre Dame's limited, and why, getting to your point, USC is a game they should have, because they were kind of in control and they let USC back into it. And I think it's because they weren't explosive enough to pull away fully. Virginia, they were able to sort of methodically work on Virginia because you can shut them down enough to sort of build up a lead. Notre Dame does not have the athletes to be super explosive. And as long as that's the case, I don't think there's any team Notre Dame's going to play where they're necessarily going to have a guaranteed win, assuming the opponent has at least some high level of quality.
So why don't you go ahead and get into the numbers, let us know what the model says, and give me your score prediction.
So, making me go from one monologue to another. The model is a per play model. If you watched our show, and I think a lot of fans of both teams probably have, our model is designed to give you a baseline, right? So we don't stick our finger in the pie and say this is how much a yard's worth and this is how much a turnover's worth. We let the model figure all that stuff out for itself. It looks at how you did against your opponents. It looks at how your opponents did against the other teams they played. Sort of builds a profile for your team, compares the teams against each other, and generates some idea of what the production is going to look like. And then from there, it looks at how you did in your past games, offensively and defensively, and then how those games went, and generates a scoring model unique to your team. Not just like points per yard, but really a more like variable. It's there are polynomial equations involved. A model that's based more on thresholds, and this idea that my concept with it is that teams tend to score when they hit different thresholds at different levels, and they can shut down at certain points. And teams respond non-linearly, if you want to look at it that way, in the game of football. And that's kind of the underlying concept behind our model. And the goal of it is, every team's unique. In pro-style teams are a little more flat in terms of scoring 20 to 40 points, 20 to 35 points every game, where spread offenses will score 50 points one week and then 6 the next. Based on all that, one of the more intermediary statistics that's generated is this percentage of opponent averages allowed. Basically, if your opponent averages 8 yards per carry, you allow 6, you allow 75% of their averages. It's just a flat neutral statistic. I think it's more useful than straight like yard per carry allowed or, yards rushing allowed, because it's totally opponent adjusted. Notre Dame and Michigan have sort of similar profiles. Notre Dame is 84% against the pass, 89% against the run. It's a lot easier to have the run number lower than the pass number. I say this all the time. Passing offenses tend to get theirs. We see this all the time. Rush offenses, you can get them down to the 50s. Absolutely, positively does not happen with pass D. I think the best I've ever seen was probably that 26 Alabama unit when they were healthy. I think they were in the mid to upper 60s, and that's the lowest that number has ever gotten. So Michigan's at 74% of opponent rush averages, 89% of opponent passing averages. Basically, you've got a Notre Dame team that is good. 89%, I would say, is good against the run, but nothing special compared to opponent averages. And yeah, they're holding teams under 4 yards per carry, but their opponents only average 4.4. It's just not anything really special. But the pass defense is quite good. 84% doesn't look a lot better than 89, but again, harder teams hold teams below their passing averages. Notre Dame is sound in the secondary. They've got a good enough pass rush. They're a good pass defense. Michigan, on the other hand, 74% of opponent rushing averages is right at the point where I call it an elite rush defense, right on the borderline. It's a 75% for me. 89% is a good pass D. Again, harder to keep teams low on the pass numbers. Now, everybody's a little inflated by playing bad teams, so 95% is probably the true average. So you're just kind of above average and not a whole lot more as Michigan. But basically, you have a Notre Dame team that's a good defense, a Michigan team that's a good defense, whereas Notre Dame can be run on a little bit, Michigan can be thrown on a little bit. The upshot for all that, when you look at the histories for these teams, it's guessing that you're going to get, about 4 yards per carry from Notre Dame, about 3.5 from Michigan, about 7.7 yards per attempt from Notre Dame, about 6.3 from Michigan. That's mostly due to the fact that Notre Dame has a better offense than Michigan. And it's guessing about a 1 yard per play advantage for Notre Dame, about 5.8 to 4.8 yards per play. Significant. And from there, it's guessing about 29-18 or 28 point something to 17 point something if you like more football-y scores. It basically comes down to the fact that extra yard per play doesn't seem like a lot, but when you come to scoring production, Michigan's right on the borderline, sub 5 yard per play, and being able to really operate an offense, not really consistently. Whereas when you get up towards 6 yards per play, you can really kind of run your offense a lot more. And so that's why it thinks Notre Dame's scoring close to 30, and Michigan's still in the teens. So what does it all mean? Well, I think the first thing it means is that Daniel's forcing me to, against my will, to continue speaking until I go hoarse. No, the thing that really means to me is that Notre Dame is better than Michigan, but maybe not by as much as some might think. I don't know where the national perception is, frankly, in this game. I know the betting line, which just came out, is only 2.5. Our model thinks that it should be more, but I do think it's interesting that Michigan is actually favored in this game by 2.5 points, and I see it in all the discussion we had earlier, and I don't see it in the model. So I do think Notre Dame does win this game. And I'm going to say 27-17, which is just kind of, again, making the model numbers sound like a football score. But I can totally see why Vegas would actually have Michigan favored. I find it interesting, but I don't find it surprising. It's everything we talked about. If you look at the talent on the field, if you look at where the advantages are in these two teams, I don't think Notre Dame... Gosh, I may actually change my mind on this. As we're talking, I don't think Notre Dame has the advantages where they need to be able to exploit Michigan. I mean, they're a tight end dependent team. They don't run the ball that well. Michigan's issue has been more dealing with man coverage. It's always been the issue under Brown. I am going to drop it. I'm going to say 20. I'm going to say 20-17 Notre Dame over Michigan. Still going to pick them, but not by that much. Michigan has some edges where they need them, and more important to me, I think Notre Dame does not have the edge where they need to have the edge to be able to beat Michigan. If you're a good passing team, and I think Penn State is a fair passing team, frankly. I don't know that they're really good. I mean, Penn State fans already hate us for, being the jerks we were to pick them to cover close.
They hate us for being right.
Yeah, they hate us for being right. Well, we picked them, us and the model picked them to cover, and they were all beside themselves at our disrespect for picking them to cover in a game, which, by the way, they did not cover. I still don't think Notre Dame even has the weapons that probably Penn State does. And that was mainly just one big pass to Hamler, which, as we said, is an explosive play machine, but not really a consistent passing threat machine. I think this game's going to be close. I am actually going to say now 20-17. And I'm almost talking myself out of it.
I think it's all reasonable, and it is interesting in that Vegas sees something, and they're usually on something. And it's not just that people like to say, well, it's just they can bounce the money on both sides. Yes, that's what they're trying to do, but they can't bounce the money on both sides if they're way out of whack, if they don't know what they're talking about. So there's something there. I think this is more about matchups and not an indictment on Notre Dame, just in that, I remember you flagged this a couple years ago with Wisconsin and LSU, in that we both thought LSU was a pretty good football team, but they were just a horrible matchup against Wisconsin, and they ended up losing that game. I've got Notre Dame as well. I also have it close, 24-20, and I would not be shocked. We say it all the time with games this low. There's a lot of stuff you can't predict there. There's a lot of randomness there, and a game can hinge on a single play here or there. I've got 24-20. I think Notre Dame is a better team than they're getting credit for. I think they're a better team than sometimes we give them credit for. I've got them back in my top 10 this week, and I didn't have them last week. I don't love the USC game, but I've been on that Virginia game since I saw it. I said going into that game, Notre Dame's going to win this game and not get enough credit for it, and I still stand by it. Virginia, ACC sucks. Yes, Virginia's a better team than they're getting credit for, especially on defense. I like the 35-20 win. I like them in this game. And it's crazy for me to say that 24-20 is Notre Dame covering or Michigan not covering. But that's where we're at, and that shows you how far rankings are really out of whack and don't really consider schedules that teams have played and just care about win-loss records. All right, y'all. That's it for Notre Dame and Michigan, and it was a fun one last year. We'll see if it turns out the same this year. Let us know if Vegas has it right, or if you have a different opinion of how this one's going to turn out. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.